Right now on Newsmax Exclusive, chemical weapons in Syria. The president says he has no doubt that the Assad regime used chemical weapons. So now what? Exclusive analysis from Oliver North and James Zogby.
Plus, the battle over voting rights heats up in Texas. Is another Supreme Court showdown pending between Eric Holder, the Justice Department, and the Lone Star State? An exclusive interview with Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott.
And as kids head back to school in Newtown, Connecticut, what is the status of new gun restriction efforts led by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg? Controversial gun rights advocate Ted Nugent joins us for a Newsmax exclusive.
And we have a Money News exclusive with anti-tax hero Grover Norquist on why the sequester has been good for the economy.
And a look at a monumental study examining head trauma and football as the season gets ready to kick off.
And remembering the dream 50 years later with the man who was there for the March on Washington, Ambassador Andrew Young. Newsmax exclusive starts right after this.
Hello and welcome to Newsmax Exclusive. I'm Kathleen Walter.
And I'm John Bachman. Our top story this week, President Obama says he has no doubt it was in fact the Syrian government that used chemical weapons against its own people. The result, more than 1,000 people, including children, dead. But as of Thursday afternoon, UN investigators were still collecting samples, hoping to determine if it was in fact a chemical weapons attack. But their work might not even matter. The Obama administration has been lining up support on Capitol Hill for a military strike against Syria. White House officials briefed high-ranking members of Congress Thursday, but the president was cagey about identifying a specific endgame or an objective of the potential strike. But he was very clear about one thing.
We have concluded that the Syrian government, in fact, carry these out. And if that's so, then there need to be international consequences.
A U.S. submarine and 4 Navy warships are ready in the eastern Mediterranean to launch cruise missiles that would likely strike Syrian military targets. A 5th warship is on its way. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel told the BBC this week that U.S. forces will be ready to act as soon as President Obama gives the order.
But if the order comes, you're ready to go like that.
We are ready to go like that.
The White House says any possible military action would be a focused response to Assad's use of chemical weapons, not aimed at ousting him. The president has already ruled out putting any U.S. troops on the ground in Syria, but no matter what the U.S. response is to the chemical weapons attack, it will not be enough, according to Colonel Oliver North during this Newsmax exclusive.
The fact is that what we're doing is too little too late. This administration began this whole thing with the promise of an Arab Spring in his Cairo 2009 speech. It did nothing to improve the condition of anyone in the Arab world. In fact, people in all of those countries are now worse off.
And North says what could make things even worse for the U.S. is Syria's longstanding relationship with Russia and President Vladimir Putin and Assad's alliance with Iran. Both nations have threatened to retaliate if the U.S. leads a military strike against the Assad regime.
And the Russians have the capacity to do some very ugly things without their hand showing it. They can, for example, start shipping even more nuclear material to North Korea and to the Iranians.
Along with Iran and Russia, China could complicate U.S.-led efforts to coordinate a multilateral military response following the use of chemical weapons in Syria. China joined Russia and walked out of a Security Council meeting, preventing a vote on a resolution authorizing military force in Syria. But the U.S. says it doesn't need UN approval. Also, the UN report will not be able to determine which side launched chemical weapons. It will only say whether or not toxic agents were used. And during an exclusive interview with James Zogby, founder and president of the Arab American Institute, Zogby says any response without the UN Security Council's support could make the Obama administration look hypocritical.
It does matter. It matters. And I think that this is a president who, having come out of the previous administration where we operated unilaterally, wanted to send a message that, in fact, we would not operate in the same way as the Bush administration did. It does matter.
Zogby was careful to point out that despite a lack of support for a military strike from the UN Security Council and the Arab League, a condemnation this week from the Arab League in Cairo does send an important message. The Arab League Secretary General called the chemical attack, quote, an awful and ugly crime.
But even if the response and coalition does resemble the one President Clinton put together in the 90s, Zogby also said a limited military strike may be able to send a message, but it is doubtful it will impact the duration or intensity of the fighting in Syria.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, Zogby said any U.S. strike would not be a game changer, so we'll see what happens there. Well, the Obama administration will sue Texas to block its voter ID law, the Justice Department said this week. The lawsuit will challenge the law under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or language. Texas moved swiftly to implement its new voter ID law after the Supreme Court in June struck down a requirement that states with a history of racial discrimination seek permission from the federal government to change their voting laws. Texas was subject to that process known as pre-clearance. Despite the court's decision, though, the Obama administration has taken an aggressive stance on voting laws, and it believes restricts minorities' voting rights. The lawsuit against Texas is a major part of that approach.
Based on the evidence of intentional racial discrimination that was presented just last year in the redistricting case of Texas v. Holder, as well as the history of pervasive voting-related discrimination against racial minorities.
The lawsuit will ask the court to block implementation of the law, alleging that it was adopted with the purpose and will have the result of denying or abridging the right to vote on account of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. Republicans accuse the Obama administration of a political ploy to turn red Texas into a competitive state for Democrats. Well, Texas Republican officials, including Lone Star State Attorney General Greg Abbott, have claimed the voter ID law is needed to prevent in-person voter fraud. Here's Abbott during our latest Newsmax exclusive.
This is something that's very dangerously real, something that must be stopped. We're using every tool to try to stop voter fraud, and the Obama administration is trying to use every tool to prevent us from stopping voter fraud.
The Justice Department also announced that it is joining an existing lawsuit against Texas's 2011 redistricting plan, which argues that Black and Hispanic voters are underrepresented under new congressional maps. And these are just a few of the reasons why Abbott says the issue of voting rights is going to head back to the Supreme Court. And there has been speculation that the Justice Department could take legal action against North Carolina as well, which recently enacted new voting ID requirements and cut down on early voting days.
Students at Sandy Hook Elementary School returned to a school in Monroe, Connecticut on Tuesday to begin a new school year, 8 months after a gunman shot his way inside and killed 20 children and 6 adults. Newtown students headed back to their school to share memories of the summer and what's in store during the upcoming year. And students at Sandy Hook returned to the former Chalk Hill Middle School, which was renovated to resemble the former facility in Newtown. To ensure the safety for everyone coming to and leaving school, security checkpoints have been set up for people to pass through. In addition, a security committee was established to collaborate and implement enhanced security measures. One major change is that all Newtown schools now have one single controlled point of entry, including before and after school hours. Families have been speaking all day about how difficult the first day was. Gun purchase permits appear to be surging upward in Newtown, Connecticut since the tragic elementary school shootings there last December, even as some parents of the 20 children killed continue to advocate for more restrictive gun laws. As of July 24th, more than 200 Newtown residents had received permits to buy pistols or other firearms, compared to the 171 permits issued throughout all of last year. The purchased permit is the first step under Connecticut law in the process of obtaining a license to actually carry a handgun or other firearm, according to the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, despite efforts from Congress, President Obama, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was also a victim of gun violence, efforts to pass new control legislation have mostly stalled, following a huge push after the Newtown tragedy. During an exclusive interview with Newsmax TV, rocker and gun rights advocate Ted Nugent says even if those laws did pass, they fail to prevent even more violence.
I just feel so sorry for the liberal Democrats who proposed these gun laws that wouldn't save a life, wouldn't stop a crime, but would criminalize a good man.
Sales are up not only in Newtown, but all across the nation. Nationwide gun sales were up almost 50% in 2012 from where they were in 2011, the Journal reported. In Connecticut, more than 91,000 guns had been sold by July 24th of this year. If sales continue at the current rate, purchases will surpass the figures for 2012 by October 1st. And here's a look at what's coming up on Newsmax Exclusive, a look at a monumental study examining head trauma and football as the season gets ready to kick off.
And we take an exclusive look back 50 years ago at Martin Luther King's dream with Ambassador Andrew Young. Newsmax Exclusive. We'll be right back.
And welcome back. In our Money News Exclusive this week, we take a look at the impact of those forced spending cuts, also known as the sequester, and how they're affecting the economy.
That's right. Our David Nelson of MoneyNews.com looked into the effects of the sequester in Washington and on Main Street. And David joins us now from our studio in New York City. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Kathleen. Hello, John. You know, it was an exciting interview, and it gave me a chance to talk to Grover and get a read from one of the leaders of the anti-tax movement and find out what progress has been made over the last several years. He points out that spending today is below where it was the day before President Obama came into office, and that's a fact that almost catches us by surprise. He lays out point by point how the GOP has chipped away at stimulus spending programs that really could have ballooned the budget even further. He went on to say that there were 7 pieces of Obamacare they managed to eliminate, like the Class Act. Now, Grover also went on and pointed out that early in the administration, President Obama wasted about $800 billion, but that Republicans were able to stop the additional $400 billion per year he wanted to spend. He believes that spending was too high when the president came into office, and it's pretty clear he's not deterred in his efforts to rein in government spending even further.
We need to protect the budget caps and the sequester, which limits domestic discretionary spending by the Pentagon and by the welfare state. And that's what's actually trended down spending from where it was going. Now, is it too high? Yes, it's too high. It was too high the day Obama came into office. It was too high during all of the Bush years and the last 2 years when the Democrats had the House and the Senate and Bush didn't have the ability to stop much. It went crazy.
Something else interesting that Grover said, we were discussing the 2 plans to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. He refers to them as Plan A and Plan B. Now, Plan A is what Senators Ted Cruz and others are pushing, which is really to defund Obamacare. And they want to use the CR, the continuing resolution, and the debt limit as the trigger. Now, Plan B, which he endorses, is to delay Obamacare, which he believes many Democrats would be willing to accept. And I agree. We both talked about it, and we agreed that some Democrats might even want to delay it to perhaps even 2015. This way they could avoid the elections next year. Now, I played him a soundbite of Senator Cruz from TV. It was from a TV program this past weekend, where the senator says that he believes the president might be willing to defund his signature piece of legislation. Grover laughed and he said, Ted Cruz needs to go back to high school.
All right, Dave, well, thanks. And Grover not pulling any punches there, talking about Ted Cruz needing to go back to high school for a government lesson.
Grover's a very honest man.
He certainly is.
Well, football season is back, and millions of Americans will soon be flocking to stadiums and to their televisions to watch the country's most popular sport.
But there are also new concerns about the long-term effects of repeated head trauma, often suffered by some football players.
Just this week, Buffalo Bills quarterback Kevin Kolb was sacked and hit in the back of his helmet by a defender. The hit left Kolb with a severe concussion, and some reports have indicated that Kolb's most recent concussion may be a career ender. All levels of football, recreational and professional, are entering a new era of vigilance regarding head injuries. No longer do players go right back into the game after suffering a concussion. Head injuries are taken much more seriously than they were in the past. But are the new precautions enough to save players from a future of Alzheimer's?
We asked that question to Dr. Gary Small during a Newsmax exclusive. Dr. Small, along with his colleagues at UCLA, recently released a study last January that sent shockwaves through the NFL. Dr. Small and his team did a new type of brain scan on 5 retired pro football players, and it showed that all 5, that's right, 100% of them, had precursors to Alzheimer's.
What's happening is when you shake up your head, whether you get a concussion or even have a subconcussive injury from a tackle, it has repercussions down the road.
Dr. Small says the study highlights the importance of improving head trauma studies, but he added that everyone is different and there's still not enough evidence out there right now to understand the real relation of concussions to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Dr. Small also says that he doesn't think improvements to helmet technology will be able to prevent all football-related concussions as well.
Would you let your kids play football based on this knowledge?
Mine likes baseball, so I don't have to make any tough decisions right now on that.
Great answer for that. Well, the March on Washington and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech this week marks the 50th anniversary.
Next, a look back at the ceremonies this week to honor King's lasting legacy, plus a Newsmax exclusive with Ambassador Andrew Young, a man who worked right alongside King as a civil rights icon, helped foster in a new era of equality in America. Thousands of people from across the country gathered on the National Mall to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for racial equality 50 years ago this week.
That's right. President Obama led the tribute to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where King changed the minds of so many Americans back in 1963. Members of the King family, along with President Obama and former U.S. Presidents Clinton and Carter, helped ring a bell marking the exact hour Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his landmark address. One of Wednesday's most rousing speeches came from Congressman John Lewis, who worked right alongside Dr. King during the height of the civil rights era.
We must never, ever give up. We must never, ever give in. We must keep the faith and keep our eyes on the prize.
Celebrities, including Oprah Winfrey, also attended the event. It was a day to reflect on how far the country has come and renew Dr. King's call for jobs and freedom. But even President Obama pointed out, America still has a long way to go.
The test was not and never has been whether the doors of opportunity are cracked a bit wider for a few. This is whether our economic system provides a fair shot for the many, for the black custodian and the white steelworker, the immigrant dishwasher, and the Native American veteran. To win that battle, to answer that call, this remains our great unfinished business. We shouldn't fool ourselves. The task will not be easy.
Former UN Ambassador Andrew Young was one of the Reverend Martin Luther King's closest friends and confidants during the civil rights era. He marched alongside King in Washington 50 years ago and stood close by as King delivered his iconic speech. And during a very special Newsmax exclusive interview with Ambassador Young, the civil rights hero, former mayor of Atlanta and congressman, helps us revisit Dr. King's dream and what it means today.
The theme of Martin Luther King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was to redeem the soul of America from the triple evils of racism, war, and poverty. And for Martin, it was a dream totally unfulfilled, but we've made progress on that dream, but we don't have a vision for the future. And we don't even know what victory is.
Really great to hear from somebody like Ambassador Young on an occasion like this. And you know, when I hear Dr. King speak today, it still gives me goosebumps. But as we heard from Ambassador Young, there's been a lot done. King's legacy is still strong, but there's clearly a long way to go.
It was a very powerful speech. Thanks, John. And we'll be right back with a look ahead to what we're working on for the next edition of Newsmax Exclusive.
And welcome back.
Here's a look at the stories we're working on for the next edition of Newsmax Exclusive. Michael Reagan, oldest son of President Ronald Reagan, shares a very personal story with us about child abuse and what he says needs to be done to prevent it in the future.
Plus, we'll have an exclusive interview with retired four-star General Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and the NSA. You'll hear what Hayden's take is on a potential U.S.-led military strike in Syria and the message it needs to send to Iran. And that's going to do it for this edition of Newsmax Exclusive.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.